Breaking news. The Missouri Supreme Court has ordered the Secretary of State to restore the pro-abortion ballot measure to the November ballot. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Mark Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. A majority of the 7 members of the Missouri Supreme Court just ruled that a ballot measure to enshrine abortion rights in the Missouri Constitution will appear before voters this fall. Mark, what's the case? What's going on? How did we get here?
Yeah, so as you say, this has been a whirlwind in Missouri. It has been a whirlwind, Paige, in a number of states that I know we're going to talk about. But essentially, this amendment had gathered signatures. It didn't attract all the attention that some of the other pro-abortion ballot measures did in states like Florida and in Arizona. But they gathered the signatures, and it had been certified by the secretary to appear on the ballot when a trial court held that it violated a state law that required the identification of the statute or constitutional amendment that would be repealed. Well, here, it wouldn't be repealing any statute or amendment. It would simply be establishing a broad grant of rights. And so this was clearly a bad decision by the lower court. It went up on a very, very fast time frame to the state Supreme Court, a conservative Supreme Court at that. And I think to many people's surprise, the case was argued and a ruling came out the same day in favor of putting this measure back on the ballot.
And during all of this, Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft tried to get around the litigation by decertifying the question from the November ballot. Now, Mark, Jay Ashcroft is no friend of democracy. We have seen him pop up time and time again to defend gerrymandered maps, to defend voter suppression laws. And this is just the latest action by him to try to take away voices from people.
Yeah, and it's consistent with what we have seen across the country with these ballot measures. There was a time when states that have these popular referendum and initiative processes, that they believed more in those processes than they did in the outcome, in the substance. Paige, as someone who is, born and raised in New York, where they don't really do governance through the ballot measure or initiative process so much, I've always kind of admired this from afar. A lot of the states in the Midwest and the West make a lot of use of this in order to enact both laws, but also to change their state's constitutions. And they have always been widely popular across the spectrum among Democrats and Republicans. First place that we saw this was really in Ohio, where we saw, there, Frank LaRose, the Secretary of State in that state, try to sort of rig the system, try to change the rules in order to defeat a pro-abortion ballot initiative in that state. That also went up to their state Supreme Court several times, and the pro-abortion initiative groups won. And now we're seeing the same thing in Missouri. We saw this also, by the way, in Florida, where there was an effort by the folks to sort of change the rules and get the ballot measures off the ballot. But it's interesting because even though we're seeing the Ashcrofts and the LaRoses and the DeSantises really lose their commitment to this as a way of legislating and changing their state constitutions, some of these conservative courts are really sticking by this initiative and referendum process.
Mark, like you said, we've been seeing conservative state courts protect measures like this. We saw it in Ohio when state officials tried to change language on the abortion measure there.
And the threshold. Remember that they wanted to
lower the threshold. They did a lot. And the Ohio Supreme Court was like, this is too wild even for us. You can't do that. You just need to let it go before the people. We saw it in 2022 when pro-choice voters and measures succeeded in states like Kansas and Kentucky and Michigan. We'll see it again this fall as pro-abortion and pro-choice measures are on the ballots in states across the country like Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Maryland, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, and South Dakota. Now, Mark, those are red states and blue states, and more importantly, a handful of swing states that will determine control of not only the Senate, but the White House this fall.
And we could add to the list of states also, again, where the courts have had to step in. Montana, it's another state where you saw the Republican Secretary of State try to mess around and get this ballot initiative off the ballot, and they lost there. In Arizona, it is really both speaks to the change of the Republican Party that, like I said, they would rather undermine direct democracy in these states than face the voters on these measures that they're losing. I mean, that's the other incredible thing, right? It's that the Republican politicians are trying to kill these things from getting before the voters, but when they get before the voters, they prove unbelievably popular. So, we mentioned Ohio. I think you mentioned Kansas. I mean, these things are running through so-called red states, because even in red states, these pro-abortion ballot measures are just popular.
Mark, that's true, but it's unfortunate that in some states, these measures have failed to make it before voters this fall because of lawsuits, because of actions from the state. We saw in Arkansas attempts by officials there to get it off the ballot, and unfortunately, they succeeded. But it just goes to show you, Arkansas is a very red state. It has a very conservative governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. It has literally the lowest voter registration rate in the country. Arkansas has incredibly low turnout rates. But still, Republican officials there were so scared of a pro-choice measure making it to the ballot that they filed lawsuits, they kept it off the ballot, and they succeeded in a state where you would think that maybe it wouldn't win, but it scared them enough to take action.
Yeah, and Democracy Docket's been covering a lot of this litigation, particularly the parts that deal with the process of how people are allowed to vote or not vote on these measures. So make sure you are subscribed. The links are in the show notes below. Paige, and you mentioned that these Republican local officials are scared. We would be remiss if we didn't point out one other Republican who is scared, which is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has been trying to figure out what the hell to say about abortion. And he has made a mishmash of his own policy. And with him, he is dragging House and Senate Republicans around by the nose as they are trying to get their footing. And, one of the stories of these initiatives is what they are doing to drive turnout and drive voting behavior down ballot. I mean, you have to believe that part of the reason why Republicans in some of these states don't want these measures on the ballot is not just the substantive policy, but what does it mean for them to be running for election when these popular measures are on the ballot? What does it mean for a Rick Scott, for example, who is in a competitive Senate race in Florida, to have this ballot initiative on the ballot? There's a Senate race in Missouri. There are House races in all of these states, as well as state and local elections. And Paige, we have seen what happens when you combine those. And I just wonder if that isn't driving some of the Republican opposition, the fierceness, the willingness of them to sacrifice their commitment to these, in many instances, century-old measures of direct democracy.
Mark, for sure, 100%. It's no surprise reproductive health care, abortion access is a huge issue for voters. I mean, the Kentucky gubernatorial race turned into a referendum on abortion in the state. Kentucky. Ruby red state, Mitch McConnell's state. That was an election about abortion. And the fact of the matter is, people don't like abortion bans. Over a dozen states in the country have abortion bans. It is mainly across the Deep South, in states that already have such limited access to healthcare, to education, to so many other things. Lawmakers are deciding to spend their time to pass voter suppression laws and to ban abortion. And the fact of the matter is, people don't like it. And when they're able to overcome those hurdles to cast a ballot, they vote against abortion bans, they vote for reproductive access, they vote for voting rights, and they vote against everything that the Republican Party currently stands for.
And we at Democracy Docket will stay on top of all of that as we head in the final weeks here before the 2024 election, which will determine not just the presidency and not just Congress and state legislatures and governors, but also these important ballot measures. So make sure you are subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. The link is in the show notes below. And we will be back next time with another edition of Democracy Docket. Thanks.